Alright, so this will be the start of a video guide that I am also streaming at the same time, so if anyone shows up, there might be questions in the middle. So this guide will be more advanced topics for Mechabellum as far as I've gotten them. As you can see, 9300 combat score, so I think I know what I'm doing in most cases. Advanced topics are going to be mostly just strategy and overarching how to go through the game from a strategic plan, not just one-offing every comp and following what you like to do kind of stuff, but more of a in-depth what mindset to have when someone's playing a certain strat versus predicting what they're doing and how to change tactics on the fly kind of thing. And to go into what I'm going to define as strategy and tactics for this, strategy is your overarching plan on how to get from nothing to a straight up win. Even before you pick your commander, strategy is what you're choosing, what you're trying to turn that into, and how you respond in certain scenarios. Tactics are the turn by turn, what you're thinking of doing with the units to accomplish your overarching strategy, but it's typically a short term versus long term. Strategy is long, tactics are short, and typically have more impact on the next battle, but less impact as the turns go on. So, knowing that I'm not going to go over specific unit counters and details on what does what exactly. If you need to learn how to play the game, this won't help you much. The Academy is good for that, and there's no shortage of people who tell you what units are good against what. That's not that hard to figure out. So this is for after you've done that basic steps. But everything up to high ranking, probably not at the very top, but in general, I've seen how the top people play, and I think what I'm going to say is valid even then. So next thing we're going to do, solo practice testing. We're going to go testing stuff, and I'm going to lay out some units and kind of show what's happening here. I'll keep things standard for now, but it's not... Yeah, a lot of this will kind of be contradicted by... I'm just showing things right now. I'm not actually playing a match. That will come at the end. So, yeah, good. So this is what I'm going to just lay out some compositions and kind of explain pros, cons, what I've seen happen a lot, and what I think is good and bad about each thing, just to give some groundwork on what people tend to be doing. This is 0.76 patched, so a lot of it probably won't be valid down the line, but I doubt they'll. If they add other units, this will change a lot. If they don't change too many units, it'll probably be mostly correct. In any case, so game starts, you pick your commander card and 2 units, one 100 cost unit and one 200 cost unit from a specific set here. Note, there's 4 100 cost units and 5 200 cost units you can get. What 200 cost unit is always more impactful than what 100 cost unit you have, with a caveat. If you're picking Fang or Crawler, that is a big difference. So it's always safer to do Marksman or Arclight if you want the flexibility in what kind of chaff unit, what kind of meat shield unit you want to pick. Because a fast meat shield unit versus a slow meat shield unit plays very differently. But in general, the 200 point unit that you get is more important in the long run. The giant units are very specific. They don't come out casually. They only come out in response to certain situations where they can be useful. So do not think at the start of the game, I'm going to go for this giant unit this game, because that's always situational. Hacker, I've only seen response to rhinos. That that's not really relevant. Wasp are even less relevant, because they only come out in very specific situations too. So in essence, when you're first picking a comp, you are picking the meat and potatoes of your strategy for how you're going to win. Let's say we have Phoenix and Arclights, two very different units. This clears up lots of little guys. This clears up very heavy guys, but they're both big units. So you have no chaff with that, no meat shields. You're expecting each of them to do their duty. So if you pick a comp with these two to start, you're going to want to switch into one of these two to follow up turn one, almost always. That's how you get a well-rounded start to things. If you just purchase 5 Arclights and have your 2 Phoenix turn one, you're probably going to lose if they have any marksman, which is also a 100-point unit, so it's very easy for them to swap into that. Because the other way to do it, say you have a Fang Sledgehammer start, you drop 3 Fang spread out, you have 2 Sledgehammers either behind or in front of them, depending on what your opponent has or what you think they're going to have. And then you can either jump into Marksman to give yourself backline threat. Basically also works against any flying, since Fangs aren't the greatest against flying. They have to get right underneath them. And even more so if you went Crawler, Sledgehammer, you almost always want to get Marksman just for the range threat, because overlapping Fang and Crawler, I kind of consider that a taboo. I don't think it's very effective in most situations. There's 1 or 2 times I might consider it later game, but to start with, I would never do that. It's too redundant, and they're both good enough against what they're good against. It's just basically taking marksman shots, and they both lose to this, and they're both bad against sledges and Mustangs. They're not different enough to be worth doing both, at least early game. So with that in mind, your starting cops are typically lots of spam units, lots of anti-air, clear, big like AoE clear. I don't run Arclight start a lot, but I've seen a lot of other people do, so don't be surprised that they're going to run big AoE clear, and usually I've seen it with either Sledgehammer or Phoenix, sometimes Stormcaller, but Stormcaller starts are a little specific. Every time you start Stormcaller, it's going to turn into a big range match for the Stormcallers. You never like rush with them, so well, you shouldn't rush with them in my opinion. But that's the meat and potatoes of your build. Ball and Crawler is a very aggressive start. If you see someone have Ball and Crawler on the field after they pick their units, be aware they're probably going to try to be aggressive and rush you. Do not place your units so far back they can't defend your tower. That's kind of a red flag. But that's also something you can manipulate, right? So if you see them start that, you know they're going to be aggressive. Maybe you put your tanks like literally right in front, and your Crawler's more at an angle from the tanks, so it kind of draws them off in 3 ways if you think they're going to try to rush you. And then that becomes your strategy to counter their strategy, or what people typically do in that kind of scenario. And even if they don't like fully fall into the plan, like they play back a little more just to bait you out, I think it's still fine in most cases. You can always adapt at that point. The one common problem I see a lot of people fall into, especially once they've played the game for a while, they still position their units as far up as possible. So the two crawlers, they'll put them like here and here when they're trying to rush this down. So ideally, troops go after this crawler sneaks in behind, some of them may get through, some of them might fight whatever's in front. If they put it too far in the middle, that's what'll happen. And that's fine as an idea for what to do, but it's going to come back to bite you 2-3 rounds later, because this is an easy counter by basically any like AoE clear, Arclight, Vulcan, even Mustang to an extent. And there's no way to put something in front of these, so you're fully committed. Even if you're just putting them this far back, I don't think it's considerably more damage the crawlers take, even if someone's relatively close. But it gives you some leeway to put something in front, say here, that will take shots first if they fully commit to an AoE strategy. And that's drips a bit into positioning, which is the next thing I want to talk about. So in general, I'm going to do arc lights here just to kind of show the counter. If you're running a defensive build, typically you want something protecting both the corners and the interior from running at you. So positioning stuff around here, and then whatever you have 3 of, so in this case another arc light would be here, and you put stuff to support said arc lights either directly in front or behind, depending on what else you have unit-wise. Stormcrawlers would be behind them, but maybe tanks might be in front of them. Because I think tanks have similar range to this, 90. In any case, let's just start this so I can get to the next round. So in this example, I've made the crawlers an asymmetric defense where, and this will happen a lot, people will, playing aggressive stuff, will send all their main units to one side and maybe have one guy hang back to stop people from rushing at their base. In general, this is what I think of that. It's not going to work if someone has planned for the right kind of defense. So even if this had, say, a marksman and had 2 sets of marksmen or behind it, and maybe like a tank over here and a tank up here too, I still don't think that's a super reliable strategy. You're going to win 1 round doing this, maybe 2, but it's fairly easy to counter offhand. So I won't go over asymmetric strategies anymore. Just be aware that they exist, and you're going to have to know how to counter and deal with them, but it's typically easier than trying to be the more aggressive one. If both players are being aggressive, someone's made a mistake, and so it's going to be a very one-sided match in that case. So then round 2, normally you'd have 2 or 3 types of units out already, so this isn't quite correct for how things are going to go, but in general, your strategy at this point would be, okay, I see what kind of comp my enemy has, comprehensively what kind of game plan they're going for. They either have a bunch of marksmen, so they're going to build up big single target damage to counter tanks, or long range stuff, so they make it hard for me to make the giant units. That's a common thing. You want to preempt a unit type so that your enemy either can't go into it or doesn't want to go into it because they think it's already a doom strat. This is a very, I won't say super high levels plan, but it's a very effective way to limit your opponent's options. And it will come in handy in a lot of games, because if you can lead your opponent in one direction for what you think they're going to want to do, for example, crawlers here, if I also have Mustang, suddenly I have 3 really squishies that are weak against Arclight, so someone may think, oh, I'll just go Arclight build this time. I can handle that. Typically you don't just want the squishies when you're making this comp. since I can't make marksman, I'll make another. But pretend this is a marksman. You'd want squishies with a marksman who can attack ahead of them, so they can't just place a big unit to run them down instantly. Of course, that's what's going to happen here. But like, that's a very solid opener. You have two types of units that are going to run at them, and then a line of units that are going to try to preemptively kill anything that would be able to kill these small units. So you have the marksman or the phoenix, a certain distance ahead, depending on the difference in speed. Like phoenix would be almost in line with your front line, maybe like half a square behind, so like that, since they move at the same speed. But if it's a marksman line, you want these guys all the way back, and marksman like barely ahead of your towers or equal with them, so that anything running at you, and again, this doesn't work against aggressive people, but you want the marksman to start shooting well before your little guys engage. So that's a positioning tip for different move speed. It's a lot easier to line things up if they're the same or similar move speeds, but for different move speeds, you just want them to start shooting ahead of time. So I might, if I knew I outranged them, like they had crawlers ahead of me, I would put this guy first ahead of the crawlers. So this guy starts shooting and softens up the crawlers before these guys crash. I'll kind of show what that looks like here, even though the arc light's going to get in the way. So I have this and this. Say I was trying to match strength and did something like that. You put Mustang ahead because the shooting at range softens these up. Fangs work in a similar way. You want them to kind of overlap each other, their areas of firing, so you get maximum effect before they crash. And fighting into melee units is almost always like that. You have to have a significant amount of defense to be able to overcome whatever incoming fire is stopping you. So, because when you saw the first battle, this guy took almost no damage because it just killed them as they were walking in. And that's the other thing that I've come to. Flipping your units. A positioning strategy a lot of players use is putting their chaff units, their meat shields, into lines like this, or even tanks and strong collars as well. One, so that they don't all bunch up for something. It's a lot harder to kill someone with a missile like this, although it can still happen. Like, I'm going to do missiles just to show as well. Let's do it over here so it doesn't impact everything. This is going to die, but if I had another unit, I'm going to make one and put it like this, you might get like one row in the back that lives, depending on how things work. Like tanks, I know, kind of bunch up and slow each other down. That would definitely survive a missile attack, whereas this maybe will survive some with a missile attack. They also put the units like right here. I'm going to show this, so they kind of split off a little bit when they're routing. So if there's some units here and some units here, putting a guy like this will kind of change the route so that it's harder to get them all with AoE attacks. That's a valid strategy, not too bad. Well, it's more of a tactic than a strategy. So we're going to do, let's put it back a bit. Okay. So this guy probably won't have time to walk in, but these guys will, and you'll kind of see what happens there. Yeah, that seems good enough. So we're going to watch this play out, and I'm going to show you some of what I mean with the Mustangs shooting and how the missiles work. See, instantly dead. These guys are pre-firing. There's much less to deal with for the crawlers themselves, and they're getting support at the same time. Mustangs barely had to move. See, all the backline here survived, so you get a little extra value that way. And there's a bunch that were on the right side that actually split off here because these guys instantly died, so even more value that way. And I mean, they're going to win because of this. So, and as you can see, enough low-level guys can beat the arc light. It's not a one-for-one thing. there's some resilience there with the Mustangs. But that's in general how things are going to go for low-level basic fights. It's very rare to get a decisive victory in these low-level fights, at least to the point that it affects the overall endgame. Again, this is why one-sided strategies aren't something I approve, because they get you early wins, but early wins don't affect your health pool enough that it really matters because there's not as much units on the ground. The big thing low-level victories will get you is, like as you see here, these two are leveling up. None of these guys are leveling up. Now, this guy had a decisive victory the first time, killed a lot of things. In the second time, also killed a lot of things. That overflow experience doesn't matter so much, but just know 2 units have level 2 ready. These guys have no level 2 ready. So it becomes a quantity versus quality problem. Because if you upgrade these 2 units, it's harder to get higher cost units in big numbers. Well, of course, these guys only cost 50 to upgrade, so they're not as big a deal. But just note that typically going for a depth strategy, quality strategy with your units, taking very powerful, hard to kill guys that are very impactful against what your opponents are using, very versatile units, getting those to high levels will do very good job about it. But if you get enough quantity, like if I was able to span 3 sets of cheap units constantly, you'd have a chance to do a lot of damage if they were the right kind of units to counter what your opponent had in quality. So there's a trade-off there. Now, this is kind of the opposite because of how this is being built right now. So next step, I think I've gone over early game enough. So once you've kind of played out the couple early game, you're on round 3, you're starting to get into the mid game where you are kind of like, how do I want to change things up to beat his unit comp? Because as it stands, if I just keep making more of the same units, I'm almost never going to win against this, no matter what I do. My units are too far behind to outlevel them. If I make more of them, these will still probably kill them. So I have to do something different. I have to pivot my strategy. There's multiple ways to beat any individual unit. This guy loses to Stormcallers, Balls, Tanks, most level 2 units that aren't Mustang. They lose to Marksman, level 1 unit, but they're going to be a little resistant to Marksman if I drop some level 1 Marksmans. Putting level 2 Marksmans out is an option, but you're losing economy in that way. You're losing money to the elite recruitment button. Early game especially, you want to be mindful of how much money you're spending on not freebies. So you get 2 units every turn as a freebie. You can get a 3rd unit for fairly cheap, but getting both expensive units and more of them is a very quick way to fall behind someone who's just taking their freebies as they come. Because you don't have to do your 2 units every. You could do 1 unit, you could do 0 unit, and spend your money elsewhere. You might fall behind if you don't use your freebies every turn, but that's also a quantity versus quality question, because if you have good enough units that counter what they're spamming or what they can spam for cheap, the quality will win if they have the right setup. So like level 2, level 3 Mustang versus level 1 Balls, level 1 Tanks. The level 2, level 3 Mustang can win pretty easily, especially against the Balls. Tanks, it's more even at level 2 Mustang. But it's also harder for a Mustang to get that high. So unless you have like the training card, that's not going to be a big threat. But very versatile units are a threat in high quality numbers because they work against so much. And even the armor, like you would get from this armor, this scales with level. On even levels, this is a hard counter. If it's 1 level below, if your Arc Light was level 1 and the Mustang were level 2, Mustang still does damage. Mustang still does not a lot of damage, but damage. So it's a possible threat still. but on even levels, Mustang will do 0 damage to anything with armor. So you have an easy counter to Mustangs in that it's not something expensive, especially with arc lights, but even other units, tanks, balls, etc., even overlords. Because if Mustang goes into anti-air, that's 75% range, 75% damage, and 30 range. 75% damage on 36 or 37 is not over 60. So even with that, you'll still do 0 damage to a level 1 overlord. You would need an attack item or this 50% more on top of that to do any damage to a overlord with shields. So counters like that means even versatile things are only really effective if they have high levels. That is to say, their tech upgrades can be much more impactful when there's both more of them and higher levels of them because of things like how the armor works. Not everything scales tech-wise, but especially for elite marksmen, on anything that has it, armor on anything that has it, that doesn't really scale. I'm trying to think what was the other one. Energy shield, because health scales, is also effective, more so on leveling guys. Final blitz on Rhino, because it scales because of max HP scales. Anything like that. The damage, I think, also matches with scaling. It's whatever base that level is, so 200% kind of scales. It's not as much as what elite marksman will scale as, because the percentage goes up and the base goes up each level, but it's something to remember. So a level 2 marksman or level 2 Mustang has 60. The 75% damage from aerial against a boat overlord, it may allow you to deal damage level 2 to level 2. Not much, but it may allow a little. This is going to be 60 something. No, even at level 2 it doesn't actually deal damage, I don't think. I think because of the low base damage on Mustang, it still doesn't do it at level 2. But higher levels, it might inch out just a little bit. Well, if you have both, it does for sure. But it's still not worth using, because cost efficiency is bad. So mid-game, you kind of plan out what you're picking for what can your enemy currently do, what can they have trouble handling, and how easily what you're playing can be countered by them. So if your enemy has a lot of marksmen, you do not want to spam, say, balls or tanks, or sometimes Phoenix. Phoenix and marksmen have kind of a weird relationship. Basically, whoever has more and has higher range, which is usually marksman has higher range, Phoenix has more, but the target selection, multiple Phoenix typically don't shoot as much as marksmen, so they're close to the same, but I think marksmen are more versatile slightly. These tend to double up their shots too much to really kill as much as what you're getting in money's worth from a marksman. So similar but different, and your strategies should reflect that difference, mostly because this is an air unit, this is a ground unit. It's also, this one's faster, so that's another thing. This happens much more in aggressive comps. This one almost has to be in a defensive comp. So another thing to consider, what kind of comp your opponent seems to be doing, defensive, aggressive. Flank potential is something to consider from round 2 to 3 on. If someone's going crazy, they'll be flanking constantly, and you have something like in this section of your map just to be ready for it. Missiles can work, but they're not a one-size-fits-all. There are some things that will survive a missile, so it's not like it's going to solve all your concerns. The other part of mid-game, if you know what kind of comp you think they're going for, Like, they have lots of aggressive units running at you, balls and crawlers, like I said, and they have some backup, maybe either Stormcaller or Phoenix to do high damage, and either the Stormcallers are up front as well, or Phoenix is right behind and they're shooting. You can be prepared for that. You can keep your guys close to your tower. It's not going to, like, instantly save the tower. You have to be ready that they will be able to get through the front if you don't put enough units up here. You need something for them to shoot, because if you have all your units to the side and like a token force up front, they will still shoot this. God, I'm rambling. Didn't plan this out well enough. Alright. So you see that they're doing that. You know to place your units out front. You know to pivot into something sturdy that can both handle the numbers that are coming at you and the big chunking force of the balls or the Phoenix. Since those units will be, you want the big units to be hitting your small guys, and you want the small units to get hit by big guys. Now, because they're doing the aggressive front thing, you could delay them with missiles, so that's another reason this is bad. There's no way to guard them with shields, especially if they're right on the line. If they have lots of both fast and big units out front, you can kind of position so that your either arc light or tanks will shoot the big guys or the little guys that are like on the edge, or if there's a big guy on the edge, you put a marksman there. So this is another positioning thing. If you can put them like either directly in line, so 1-to-1, but further back so that they have time to shoot, that's an advantage the defender gets. Range advantage. And these guys don't have any flexibility. They can't move besides selling a unit. Where is it? Field recovery. So you can sell a unit in front and kind of bait things that way, but it's just as easy for your opponent to field recovery, and you can only do that once a turn. So you're still committing things with that strategy, but it's a little more tricky. But it is a good mix-up to throw out, similar to a flank where you have a unit that you know is going to attack something it wants to attack, and you switch it out with something that's resistant or good against it, and you get a break in the line that way, and you can kind of help flood through with that. So then there's also kind of the hard pivots where you've planned it out so that they have a specific kind of force. Like, again, you have this force, you expect them to spam more arc lights because the first 2 to 3 turns you've been focusing on this. You have 5 units of crawlers, say, and 4 units of Mustang from turns 1 and 2. You didn't spend any money on extra stuff. You just bought a bunch of meat shield units, and you have them far enough back where you have flexibility now. You can put big units in front and block or kill the arc lights, and they'll have to respond to that. But you get a turn 3 victory that way. You know they're going to put something in front that's good against whatever big unit you have here. So now they have arc light, and then they almost certainly have to put chaff, like crawlers, in front of the arc light. So then you put a Vulcan, say, right there. So all the chaff gets burned. Arc light has to shoot a Vulcan now. It's like, that's not very good against it. Marksman kills arc light again. That's the kind of strategy you want to pull off if you're on the defense. You want to bait them into a certain unit type, so they can't respond as flexibly to what you're going to put down. So it leaves them on the back foot for 2, 3, 4 rounds in a row, because you know the flow of things, you know the counter that's coming. So that's a pretty solid strat for, I would say, early game. Of course, you're not going to get Mustang Mustang crawler in every starting comp, but that's the kind of idea that you want to pull out. If you're running a slow comp, Fang tank, Fang Stormcaller, you start to get into either big heavy-duty frontline things. By that I mean either arc lights, balls, tanks, so that the Stormcallers have plenty of time to shoot. Because if you're going Stormcallers, you either want to go all into Stormcaller, or you just bait with the Stormcaller. You do all or nothing with Stormcallers. So in a comp like that, you keep them on the back foot by saying, am I going to go more into Stormcrawlers? Because if they have tanks and fangs as well, into fangs and Stormcrawlers will win every time. So then they might go into Stormcrawler and say, oh, well, I have these balls. These balls are going to outrun my front line, so the fangs are protected from most of the Stormcrawler's attacks, and the balls can still kill tanks. Although they'll die eventually, but your Stormcrawlers are actually attacking their important units the whole time. So again, that's the kind of flow you want to put forward to keep your opponent from knowing your strategy and being effective against it. Now, that's somewhat resistant to flying units because you have Fang, but it's still not very good against them. So if someone goes a more unorthodox counter to that, let's say Phoenix instead of Stormcrawlers, you might lose out a little bit if they're able to kill, say, the balls or the Fangs, especially if they kill the Fangs with that, because your Stormcrawlers are then useless against the Phoenix, and if they get enough of them, they'll beat Fangs no matter what. Of course, Fangs are more resistant to Phoenix because they have the energy shield as well. So that's taking a less effective unit against your comp to get a momentary victory, and that's worth it in most cases. If you get someone to throw a wild card out there, but it's not super effective in the long run, that's typically a way you can also win the game, albeit it might take a little longer than just constantly expecting what they're doing. So, something I've been kind of ignoring with all this unit composition talk, specialists and the cards you're picking between each round. I'm going to start another game. Because I think the positioning and stuff I've kind of given enough of an overview. So we're going to do that. So in a start like this, say you have your guys. Elite Specialist, I think, is still in a very bad spot right now, even after the small buff it received. Rhino, Supply, Marksman, all very good starts. Cost Control can be good, but it's tricky. Let me see if the other guys exist here. Yeah, Quick Supply is very good, but with a caveat, only if you like what the 200 unit is, because you can get a very strong comp with a bunch of 200 units. Like, I wouldn't pick this because I don't think Fangs and Phoenix complement each other very well, unless you know they're going to go Marksman, which you don't. You don't know that. Fangs and Steel Balls, Aerial Specialist can be useful, especially since it doesn't show up later anymore, so you can get that quick supply bonus if you're going for aerial units. I don't think it's as good if there's Phoenix in here, because that kind of eliminates part of the benefit here, but it's still worth considering. Heavy Armor is very good. Speed Specialist, only if you're running an aggressive deck do I think it's a good starting pick. It can be useful later, but it's definitely not needed when you're shooting more than anything. So let's do... God, these are all pretty bad unit combos. Let's do this. Make an aggressive Crawler Phoenix start, because speed kind of complements that. And for this one... God, if this wasn't elite, I'd pick this. Because Marksman Sledge works pretty well together. I'm going to pick Arclight. Now, the Rhino start is good because these two give very solid grasps over air. Very solid grasps over air units. So there's no air units that work against this combination. And Rhino is an all-purpose ground unit that's very good. If I see a reinforcement for, say, the electromagnetic anti-interference item, so basically the anti-hack item, I will grab that instantly because my level 2 Rhino will get a ton of value off of that. Even if you only have the one Rhino, it can be very effective to either bum rush towers, as the Rhino's a melee unit and it won't get lost along the way fighting things, and you can use your mobile beacon to command the Rhino to go in different directions. if they had gone Stormcaller for the enemy, the Rhino could be used to run interference on the Stormcaller shots, delay them significantly by making him run all the way across the field. This Rhino has a lot of value, similar to how the early Marksman level 3 has a lot of value, just for as a kind of stop to a lot of ground units. Because the only thing that really beats a Rhino is an air unit, which we've already determined isn't very good against this, and like balls, if there's something around the balls, especially range balls, or marksman. Really high level marksman also works against a Rhino, especially if you have the interference canceling item. Hackers, which is also considered a counter, isn't useful anymore. I mean, I guess Fortress is the other thing, and Melting Point, which aren't a big concern because this Rhino is going to come out early enough. These two units are almost certainly not going to be used. A turn 3 giant unit can be effective, or a turn 2 giant unit can be effective if they have giant specialist or aerial specialist with overlords. But that's its own strategy. Not really what I'm going to go into this game, since no one got giant specialist and I didn't pick aerial specialist. So let me go over. Well, I don't have. Normally there's the little formation option here, which I kind of look at once I've decided on what I'm going to pick. If there's something that matches the formation I have in mind, I select it just to speed things up a little. But in general, I will always manually move things, because this is my default setup. Sometimes these are inside, depending on what I think the opponent's going to do. But I'm going to leave them outside against this comp. And then I have this guy a little further back. So I'm sure these things are going to take point. And knowing what I'm up against, I might even go another Mustang for the middle ground. Because if I was the enemy here, because I am the enemy here, I might do something like that, with the caveat as I haven't selected more things, because I don't see a one-shot solution to what he's got here. So I kind of spread out my units, looking for an in to get, especially if they're going to go one-sided, which I don't think anyone starting this unit would necessarily go one-side formation. But this is good against one-side formation if you can be aggressive because you have fast units. But I'm also thinking I just get, yeah, I do this. So in the end, I do something like this against this comp from this side. If I was a more aggressive one-sider kind of guy, you might bunch up three crawlers here, maybe 4 crawlers here, and both of your Phoenix. And you would definitely win the first round like this, but that I'm playing more to late game. I want to win the match, not the first battle. And on this side, arc lights would be effective, but I don't like going arc lights, and I don't think they're going to get enough value to truly matter. So I would think, I mean, Fangs are really good here. I don't want to go into Fangs because I have Mustangs. Tanks are okay. Don't have the money for that. No, I'm going to get Fangs. Fangs are fine. So in the end, it becomes this and this. So this becomes the formation in the end. They're not far enough apart where one side's going to get attacked before the other, but they're definitely close enough they can support each other if someone's rushing, or they can these will get a little further ahead, but they have more range than the Fang anyway, so that's typically fine, because they're both kind of chaff units. There's 12 of these and 18 of these. They're both small units that get a lot of value when fighting things that have low numbers but high damage. So they're not different enough where it truly matters, but the important thing is that this guy's slow, because you could also go crawlers and do something similar, but your positioning would be different. Crawlers you might want to put back here if I went them instead of fangs, so they will walk ahead, but these guys will still come attack anything, shoot first. Because they're further out, these have a higher chance of blocking, or at least starting to fire on anything that's attacking, but I went fangs because they also have Phoenix. If they had marksman, I would almost certainly go crawler, but against Phoenix, we'll do fangs to be on the safe side. And we'll just show how this plays out for a turn 1 start. Okay, you see the defensive team lost, as kind of expected. High aggressive team with speed has a very good shot of winning that, at least early game. That's why I went multiple crawlers instead of anything else, since that's going to overpower most things turn 1 no matter what, and lost about 500, almost 600 HP off that. That's a pretty good start. I think it was 500. I forget what exactly I started with, but it was around 500. So then, which side am I on? I'm on this guy's side. So I could go Assault Fang here. That's not bad. Deployment Specialist is always good, but it messes up your money a little bit. So you have 400, and Mustang are good against everything. Ideally, I want 2 Mustang here. Deployment Specialist costs 50. I'm a little behind if I do that. Assault Fang. Easy. So then, knowing that's my strat, more Mustang. And we know he has a lot of units, so I spread things out a bit. Now, you might be thinking, well, this guy got through the middle last time and killed your ranged unit, and that's like, I know he did. But I'm more interested in making sure my flanks are both secure, because this also protects against flanks. And someone as aggressive like this will probably want to have put a flank here. So you're kind of hedging your bet against that, doing this Mustang placement. Because otherwise I could have done, maybe not directly next to it, but I guess it's right next to him. Something like this. A well-placed shot here, a missile, sentry missile. It probably won't kill everything here, but it's probably going to kill half of this unit, and maybe the marksman, even though it's twice as slow as these guys, so these guys are going to end up in front of the marksman no matter what. A shield will fix that problem, so this positioning isn't the worst, but I don't think it's as valuable as something like this in the long run. This is all looking ahead. I don't care if I win the next battle. It's not going to hamstring me for the rest of the game. I have theoretically 3.5 to 4,000 health left still. There's a lot of game to come. It's not worth worrying about yet, because there's a lot that could go in here. Big units, small units, anything really. So this is a good next step. It keeps me on pace with unit composition for a very solid anti-air still. They're never going to want to go air any more Phoenix out than this, I would think. So I've kind of cut off that option for them. And then for the opponent, you get the same thing. Almost always going to get Deployment Specialist with this kind of comp. 3 units ago is good, but then that leaves me with 350. And that's a little iffy as well, but it's still better than... I don't think I want to upgrade this, since I don't think I'm going to get a lot of value out of the crawlers to come, because I know he has some good units against it, and even though he has some marksmen as well, I don't think crawlers are necessarily the way forward any more than they already are. You have 5 sets of crawlers. It's very good deterrent to putting more single target damage out on the field, like I did marksman before. You're never going to get anything stronger than you're never going to get anything stronger than a sledgehammer out on the field from a damage perspective, and those aren't very good against giant units regardless. So these guys have done their job. I'm not going to invest anything more into crawlers. That does leave me with a conundrum. I also don't want to go Phoenix necessarily, so I have to pivot round 2. That's a bit of a tricky situation since you don't know exactly what the endgame strat for your opponent's going to be at this kind of situation. You know you just have to stay aggressive. And in this case, I feel like that means balls. Balls are a very good aggressive unit because they are fast. They have the option of splitting into multiple crawlers as well, so your upgraded crawlers would matter tech-wise. You're kind of countering any big units enemies could tank, Vulcan, etc. So it heads off a lot of bets in that regard, and you can kind of mask them as well late game, so they're not as super squishy compared to marksman as well. So in that case, I'm going to do balls. And I'm going to buy one of those, and I'm going to keep buying crawler, just the one crawler. I'm going to put the crawler back here, and I'm going to try to make it resistant to all of the Mustang and Fangs that are out there. So I'm putting it fairly far back as a second wave, because these guys are all going to hit well before this guy hits. That's more for late game as well, since I could unbalance my formation, put like this guy here, and then this guy, well, I'd probably put him like this. Again, kind of resistant to Mustang that. It also threatens the middle guy if they left him open a little bit. But it's generally going to give your team longevity, but it's going to be less effective as an attack unit when it's in this narrow file versus length file. I'm not sure what the proper name is for that. So you've got balls coming in. Your little guys are going to get attacked by Mustangs first off. You're not 100% sure since you don't know how he's positioning Mustangs. If he had put the Mustangs interior, this ball would be extra effective. But you don't want them attacking Mustangs or these guys really anyway. They're more a threat for the future. So it's fine to leave them kind of behind in this case, at least in my opinion. But since I'm going to try to future-proof this team as well a little bit, we're going to end up with that. And we'll see how a level 2 plays out. So you see how basically the opposite of the first round went. They lost resoundingly because it was an easy enough counter with just more Mustangs, which they had an easy money for, and basically nothing surprising happened there. The right side still lost, but it just lasted longer, took out more of the enemy's troops. With the addition of the balls, you kind of saw how the second wave of crawlers leapt in there. If the balls were gathering aggro from all the Mustangs and had, say, armor upgrades on them, that would have been much more effective, but we didn't have the money for that, of course, because we had Phoenix start, not ball crawler start. And you kind of see why this comp works a little better with balls, not Phoenixes, but I kind of tried to force it since there wasn't too many good options. From the start, it just happened that they got countered pretty easily by what the opponent started with. So they have 2 units selected, a fairly strong baseline for a lot of things they could go into, whereas this side still has some more room they have to dip into monetarily wise to kind of overcome what the opponent has, and there wasn't a lot of room to pivot their turn to. both because they got the extra deployment, and they just didn't have necessarily a winning comp for round 3. But they won round 1 at least, so they're still not in a completely terrible position. So then here becomes kind of an interesting option. Photon coating can be useful on something big like the balls or a giant unit if you're thinking in that direction. In general, I don't like it. I don't like it as an item because there's a tech upgrade for boats that does it for everyone. So this could end up useless later on. And if you're going, I mean, rhinos can already also do a tech upgrade for just themselves with this too. But if you're going to go one big unit that you know is going to turn things around, photon coating can be okay. In this case, I would go smoke bomb because it is very effective at stopping most of what they have. And they're like, oh, that's the rhino, they get turn 3. Suddenly this becomes a lot tougher, but balls kind of works against that, and Phoenix kind of works against that as well, so it's still not terrible, since you know now this is going to kind of run in quick. But there's still something that can be done with the rhino. Even though this isn't a terribly aggressive comp, the rhino can still be useful in a couple different ways. So this turn's typically going to be double ball. Put one here and put one here. Now I could do another crawler, which I probably will do since I want to keep up the unit pressure. Because ideally I'm still going to swarm him. But it's going to be after I put Vulcans out front. Because late game, I'm starting to think, okay, ideally this comp turns into balls, crawlers, Vulcans as the main part. The Phoenix are just kind of there because I had them from the first thing. But that's where I'm thinking this comp's going to go into. And, of course, since I'm playing both sides, I kind of know that. So this side, you see how it has a bunch of basically garbage that's very effective against what I'm streaming in with. But I also have this rhino, which is kind of what the balls are effective with too. But a smoke bomb would typically go around here. Might do a little forward, probably around here. Because these guys are going to come forward enough where this smoke matters. It's not going to affect the marksmen, but that's fine. They were never going to get close enough for it to really matter. And marksmen aren't the big threat here anyway. So that's typically how I would play this side of things. I know generally what I'm going for by round 3. It's just a matter of how I'm going to get there. Because I spent 600 this time. I'm going to have 800 for next time. Since I'm not going to take advances, it's too early for that. This is something you do end game to try to finish someone off. These are not really impactful. I don't have the extra money for them because I had the third unit I could use. And if I was going to pick one of them, it would be defense every time with this comp. Since these are short range, balls don't care how much damage they have to start with. They're always going to deal crap tons after a second or two of firing. And crawlers do enough damage on their own as well. So this is a very low priority with this team. On the other side, however, the attack is probably more important, but I'm not sure when I'm going to get that. And I don't like any of these. This can be okay if you're playing a really tricky kind of style, but defensive-wise, it doesn't really matter that much. Same with this. It's whatever. And it kind of tips your hand saying you're going to play that kind of style, so I wouldn't get it this early anyway. Skip for the extra 50. 50 is actually pretty impactful a lot of times because it could be free sentry missile, free upgrade, a bunch of things. So Rhino is going to go pretty far in the back, actually, because this guy, based on what I'm seeing of the opponent, is going to probably end up beelining it for one of the towers eventually. I could also throw it on the side, but that's risky. There are ways to counter it if I try to flank with the Rhino. especially since he already had a ball out. So I know he can do more balls. I don't think putting a Rhino on its own is very good. So it's going to be my Juggernaut running towards the enemy's stuff late game, and for right now it's just going to protect this guy. But it's fast, it can stay in the back, that's fine. Other things I'm going to do. I could do more Rhinos. He has one ball, so I'm not super considering that option. But more Rhinos is a thing. I could do Vulcan. I have enough money. Dropping a Vulcan is very effective. I know smokes are available, so I know something's getting smoked. I don't really care about it, because even if he wins this one, he's still in a bad position, especially if I predict what he's about to do. I don't want Stormcallers, I don't want balls, I don't want tanks. On their own, tanks could be okay, but I don't think they're required. Nothing he's done says tanks are the answer to it, because he could easily switch into big things soon, and tanks will be useless then. But right now they'd be okay against most of his things, but it's not super effective. It'd just be making it a good thing better. So it's basically saying I want to do more of the same, which is not how I think this game should be played effectively. You want to always be throwing enough of a curve where the opponent has to react to it, even if you're already winning, especially if you're already winning. So my options are really Vulcan, Fortress, Overlord, maybe more Fangs are kind of what I'm considering right now. Overlord is a very juicy pick. He only has Phoenix, which clearly are not a priority to him. They've done basically nothing so far, and Phoenix probably won't do too much level 1 to a Overlord. So there's a couple options here for juicy things. Notice two of them were, or most of them were, big things. Only the Fangs are really more of the same. I could do more Mustangs too, but I feel like that's going to start getting old, and if he does ball armor, they get countered pretty hard by that, so I don't want to dip any further into it at the moment. The other option was Fang. I get 2 more of those, and I upgrade the Fangs with the shield tech. If I think he was doing more single target stuff, that's almost certainly what I would do, but against mass crawlers, it's not that great, and there's much better counters to it. But basically, I think I can kill most of his crawlers with these 4 Mustangs, and I want them to get more experience because they're more useful. Any other crawlers would lose to this Rhino, so also ground forces aren't much of a threat right now. The balls are the only thing I'm kind of considering a threat, but it's still early days for them, so they're not enough of a threat that I'm super worried yet. So in essence, I don't need Vulcan that much. It would just, again, be more of something that I'm already pretty good at. Fortress seems like a good play, and Overlord seems like a good play as well. Fortress is the more flexible one, since it's better against Phoenix if he does happen to go further into that direction. It's just kind of hit or miss against the balls is the thing. Am I worried about the balls, or am I worried about the Phoenix? It determines whether I pick one or the other, and that's kind of predicting what your opponent's going to go. Knowing what I know, I think Overlord's the better choice here, both because Photon Emission makes a very tanky set of units, even among guys that are not normally tanky, which is most of what I have here. And also, Overlord Artillery is good against basically everything he has. The Fortress, it has anti-air barrage available, and I use Fang Summoning on Fortress to just in case they want to quick switch into a melting point, stuff like that. So I think I'm okay doing Fortress here because I can Fang Summon against the balls and be a bit defensive in that regard, and they'll kill the balls pretty quick. So I'm gonna go Fortress here on the off chance he does things. Yeah, it really doesn't matter which you pick, Fortress or Overlord. Both can be good, both can be bad. But I'm gonna go Fortress here. And we do 1 there, and I already have the Rhino in the middle, so I'm going to... I saw he put 1 guy over here, so I'm going to... Yeah, I'm going to put this guy here. So if he puts a big unit out, it's probably going to be in the middle here. to counter the little guys, so I can shoot that instantly. Since I'm putting this fortress here before he's doing a Vulcan, this is kind of a hedge against putting a Vulcan like right front and center here. This is a good spot for that, because the Vulcan's still going to kill the Fangs first, but he'll kill the Vulcan before it really kills any of the other stuff. This is also a better spot if I do the barrier, because then it covers 2.5 units, kind of. I think it almost gets him, so you might do it that if you truly wanted to get the marksman safe with the barrier, but it's not a big deal. I like separating my guys a little bit more. But then I have this extra 50 floating around, so I can either sentry missile this side if I was worried about it, which I'm not, or do something else. But I'm saving it up for either one of these, eventually probably attack, because Mustangs, or the mobile beacon to command the Rhino to attack things. And we'll let this play out. So this is a mid-game pivot. This guy, I pivoted into Fortress on this one, and this one's kind of doing more of the same, but getting prepared to pivot into like balls, basically. Just mass balls kind of thing. And you kind of see how the smoke's playing out. Smoking that side turned out to be really good, because then the balls were able to get in close and kill the big heavy things. Crawlers are enough of a threat here because the Mustangs couldn't really shoot at him. Again, I'm not too worried. He's still in a really bad position because smoke is 1 turn, and this side's still 1. So it's like, it's not a big loss, and that's not going to be an effective thing for too much longer. Well, it is. It works next turn, but even then I can kind of play around it. So yeah, that was basically a nothing loss. He's buying time by getting those wins. He's not really getting ahead by getting those wins. If he's an aggressive comp, so he wants to get more wins, but he wants to win by enough that he's threatening to end at almost any turn. So this is an interesting kind of turn, because I have multiple options here. Well, I've already got a giant unit, so this is good. This could be a good flank / going for his backdoor if he didn't put the crawlers in back there. But I know about them now, so I'm probably not going to pick that. But if he was more aggressive in ignoring the back line completely, I might pick that to try to slow him down, put him off balance this turn since he has a smoke out. Incendiary is very good to counter the rest of his smoke, but it's also really damaging against Mustangs and Fangs. So I'm not really considering the Incendiary Bomb, but it is a very good idea. And then Amp Core. This is probably the most important thing for the Fortress to have. Items like this. So I'm probably going to pick this. But this is also a very good option as well for value later game. And so now the 50 from earlier kind of comes into play there. I get a free level, which is something you typically want to do because you don't want experience to stack up and just sit there not gaining anymore. But this is also important in case he goes like mass balls, because the level 2 balls are going to be hard to kill now. Not for him because he has a core. He has an amp core. But I would go this. Yeah, I would go this. And one of these. And put him in the back line as a second wave. And I could do shield. Probably wouldn't matter too much. He doesn't have a lot that's affected by shield. If I really wanted to win this turn, I would do 2 sentry missiles, but I'm still not really worried about him because he doesn't have a great late game pivot that I can see. Melting Point kind of gets countered already, but that might be the actual play, Melting Point. Knowing what I do about what I'm transitioning into, kind of, Melting Point's probably pretty good, but I still don't see it as a huge threat. So I think the safest bet, attack enhancement. Mobile Beacon was also a really good option for just straight bum rushing it, but I want my Mustangs to be able to kill all of his stuff still. So even if he levels up the crawlers at this point, I still think that helps a lot. So I still may have to get a Vulcan as this side based on the number of crawlers he has, but it could still tip out where Mustangs are enough. It's not for sure yet. So that side I think is fairly solid. It's more of the same, but it leaves easy room to transition into Vulcans or Overlords if I really need to, or I mean, it keeps a marksman strong, so I can kind of do range or elite marksman if I need to there. The Fangs are kind of irrelevant at this point since he didn't go into something the Fangs necessarily are good at against, like more Phoenix or marksman. But I'm overall happy with how this side's doing. But again, that side had the advantage because of how the openings got picked. And the opening picks are important, but it just says who has the advanced knowledge of what the comps are going to turn into, because they can kind of transform by what they pick next to pivot, what units they're going into. That's how they control the flow of the battle at this point. But it's still anyone's game. People could make mistakes. Interesting cards could show up. But that's kind of how mid-game goes. After round 5-6, it starts going to late game. You get really big money totals. And I'm not going to play this out all the way until late game. It'll probably end up Vulcan versus Fortress versus maybe more Vulcan too. I think Vulcan's really good right now based on the comps and the meta that's getting played. So it should be a considerable option no matter what, despite its weaknesses. You definitely want to put Vulcan far enough back where it can be protected, because there's certain things like Fortress, Overlords, even Marksmen can really kill Vulcans fast enough that they don't necessarily clear all the chaff that would show up, especially if there's a second line, like how I put up on both sides. So Vulcans aren't foolproof, but you need to use them as a useful tool in a lot of situations. If this had turned into one side had a Stormcrawler, the comps would be changed drastically. Even if it's just 2 random Stormcrawlers, I think that would affect the playing field a lot. Again, it's not good against an aggressive speed-focused deck or speed-focused team like this, but I mean, even this side, Incendiary is probably best. Even as a super aggressive team, you still want to use Incendiary aggressively. I wouldn't use it this turn, since there's a chance he could shield. Of course I didn't, because, again, Incendiary also hurts crawlers really bad, so both sides would be effectively neutered if Incendiary went off. So I already have the smoke there. I don't really need to stack Incendiary on top of it, and it's not a complete wipe if I use it. So I'm not going to use it yet. I'm going to keep it for when I think I need a decisive victory. It's probably going to go somewhere like here. Here when I do it. So there's a chance things could range shoot this before they all die. But there's also really strong units here that I just need to get rid of. So even if I don't effectively win or lose that side, it's still worth doing because they committed more to it, that kind of thing. That's what Incendiary is really good for, the asymmetrical stuff. Or if you had very long range things, like if I had range Mustangs and Fortress and Marksman, then Incendiary would be better for this comp because you could place it like right here, and most things could still shoot that from that range. But that's getting a little more specific details than I really wanted to go to for this. So know that mid-game kind of turns into this, trying to head off each other's bets. Again, Fortresses and all this other stuff was kind of predicted by the ball play, so there was an anticipation factor for what he could go into that would screw me up. But balls don't necessarily beat Fortresses either, so it's not like something you want to overcommit into. You might want to get range and just hide behind or if you have hard target and range, that's a good combination to get rid of Fortresses as balls. That's a new tech that's going to be fairly impactful. Vulcans, also something on this side that are very considerable. But he got the fortresses to kind of head that off, so it's not great. I don't want to go Overlord. He has too many anti-air options for that, so that's already limiting my options to maybe Melting Point at this stage. But he's also fairly resistant to that. So more balls is typically the answer here. I don't know that I want to go 3 because I want to upgrade these. Kind of doing what I said I didn't want to, and playing this out a little more. I could also upgrade crawlers, especially if you had subsidiary crawlers, but I'm not really considering that at this point, since they don't need to survive more than one shot anyway, and I think I can clear out the Mustangs at least this turn well enough that I don't need to upgrade these crawlers. So I'm going to kind of leave it at that, and get defense enhancements, because I don't need more crawlers at this point. I'm already deep enough into that pothole. But also something like Mobile Beacon works very well for this kind of comp, because I could take, say, these 3 units and drag most of them over to this side that was weaker. Of course, they have a fortress now, so it's not as effective as it was, but taking Mobile Beacon, setting him over there, could be very good as well. I don't use it as much, but especially on offensive, that's a very valid option. And that's kind of where we're going to leave off with the mid-game explanation. Late game is just more of predicting what your opponent's going to do. Once you get someone down to a healthy life total to kill them, say under 1,500, that's kind of a break point for how much damage you can reasonably do if you have like 2 giant units, say. Anything under 1,000 is definitely in kill range, but 1,500 is kind of the most you could actively do. Around 7 to 8, which is where most non-close games tend to end. If there's a clear winner, 7 to 8 is the longest anything should go. So late game is more of the same. Until you get into kill range, in which case you start considering either buying your active king. This used to be a nuke. Used to be a lot easier to close out games with it. I don't think it's necessarily good or bad that they got rid of it. I think it makes games less snowbally in general, so I'm okay with this. This side of things would definitely get the oil more than the other to slow them down. Like getting oil this turn and slowing down left side so that the smoke's not as impactful would definitely be a strategy, but I don't think it's a super useful tool in most cases, unless you're facing a group like this anyway, so I don't buy it most of the time. But again, you buy those big actives, when you're on the reinforcements screen selecting what you want to pick, big active skills that you just toss down, like incendiary nukes, thunderstorm, orbital bombardment. That's all really good finisher stuff. And it's also why getting an early orbital bombardment's pretty good if you're playing against a defensive comp. Because anything that stays in one place too long, orbital bombardment will destroy almost all their chaff over the course of how long it shoots. And that will come off cooldown by the time you need to finish someone off. So it's very good even if you get it early. So you pop all your actives, you try to buy ahead if you think you can finish them in one turn. These are the one-turn buffs. Range, especially if you're not playing a comp like this, can be very effective. Speed, if you are playing a comp like this, can be very effective for finishing someone off. If you have extra money, just buy them both. Buying Mass Recruit and Elite Recruit can be very good if you're trying to pivot hard after seeing the enemy do something unexpected late game, because you have all that extra money. Once you have 1,600 or more money, you can buy 2 to 3 of almost anything. So that's when these extra costs don't become as relevant, because early game you're wasting a lot of money, possibly an extra 200 cost unit if you're mass recruiting, but this is definitely the one you use more than elite recruiting. Only use elite recruiting pretty late in the game if you want like 3 level 2 marksmen to try to counter basically an overlord, stuff like that. That's pretty effective. Other late game kind of strategies, if your opponent has left a pretty aggressive team comp like this, putting something back here to either draw off stuff that's trying to head to the front. So like if I put something here in this area and in this area late game, it would draw off these and maybe part of this, and then you're only dealing with like half their units. So it's kind of a asymmetric attack being done. So if like this side was an asymmetric attack, you could pull off so many units that it becomes, and all the defending units too, so it becomes an easy shot to get this tower while only half the units are fighting your army, while the others are distracted running to and then from whatever flank you put down here. So that's a very valid strat to fighting aggressive units if you think you can kill them in one turn, because if you don't kill them in that turn, then they will have an answer for this, either in the form of a sentry missile, which they might already have and make things difficult in that regard, meaning you'd have to put like a rhino or a fortress there, or an overlord to really survive things, which is usually more of an investment than you want to do, because if you're putting little small units on the flanks to do this, like crawlers, etc., also doing a tech upgrade on one of your more main units, like say Mustang range, or Fangs here, or the barrier, etc. Ideally you'd already have barrier late game, but Fang summoning, or maybe anti-air if you think they're going into air. So doing a tech upgrade with a flank late game to draw off units more than to try to sneak into the tower, because most people will have some kind of defense that stops a tower flank, but they'll still be weaker on the front line while the main units, so it turns into asymmetric attack where your flanks become the weak side and that you know are going to lose, and your front line is going to win and railroad them past. And I think that's a much more valid strategy. Even if you end up like selling these off again, field recovery these later, because they've already put an answer to them there, that can be a very effective one-turn late game strat to win a battle hard, or just save yourself if you're trying not to die, kind of thing. Other late game stuff, items like this, attack items, defense items, those can be very effective mid and late game to superpower a unit. Yeah, putting an auto healing or a 300% HP fortress down turn 3 or 4 is very threatening and demands attention from the enemy after almost certainly losing that round. Even if you got balls here, chewing through 300% HP fortresses is not easy. So there's a decent chance the fortress survives anyway, even against like three balls attacking it at the same time. So even things that might counter it normally might not counter it if you give them a strong enough item buff for these giant units. And that's the only time I would say mid-game transition into a giant early, unless it was a very clear counter to whatever your opponent's doing. Because putting one giant at a time down is not normally that effective, but it's better to get them out early because you want them to level. Leveling your giants is more effective than leveling any other unit type, in my opinion. Maybe marksmen are the only other thing. Arc lights kind of too, if you're running the arc light Exodia build, which is just all the tech upgrades on arc lights and they're all level 5, then they can be extremely threatening too. But that's another kind of comp, and I might go into that while I'm actually playing games, but I'm going to take a quick bathroom break before I start playing games, and this will be the end of the basically guide content. So hopefully I start posting this somewhere and kind of see how that goes.